You know, we often talk about how important it is to validate product direction before we go too far down the development path. But do you have a framework for conducting that research? We're going to talk about that today. But first, would you show your support for Product Coffee by clicking the like button and subscribing to our channel right here? Thanks. Okay, let's get started. This week on Product Coffee, I spoke with Jay Cornelius, president of Nine Labs, about his book Loops and the research framework that he presents and uses to study markets, users, and competitors.
I started my first business in high school. Nine Labs is my fifth business. So I've been through the ringer a couple of times. And I think it all comes back to a quote that somebody told me maybe in middle school or maybe in early high school, that Henry Ford once said that you start a business by finding a problem and solving it. Mm-hmm. And that's rung true for me again and again. My first business was started because somebody came to me with a problem and I helped them solve it. My second business was started because somebody came to me with a problem and I helped them solve it. Nine Labs as a consulting company started when I left the software industry, where we made software that made websites. That's the coffee cup company that you mentioned. For 15 years, we made 60 something products across Mac, Windows, Linux, all types of things. And I was pretty tired. And the consulting business, Nine Labs, started as a result of being in the community like you, Jason, and people coming to me and asking questions and me deciding to charge them to answer those questions. And so I kind of fell into being a consultant. And now we're almost 10 years in and things are going well. And that philosophy of identifying the problem first and falling in love with the problem and then trying to solve that problem in the most elegant way possible is the core of everything I've ever done and has proven to be the best way to solve product problems and help companies grow in every experience I've ever had.
Cool. Let's bring it forward to the book, because a lot of what we're going to talk about today is kind of inspired by some of the things that I picked up in your book. So when you wrote Loops, what was it that actually inspired you to write this book?
I noticed myself saying the same things to different clients and different people again and again and again. And when I got it down to the point where I could almost recite it verbatim, I decided this should probably be written down somewhere. And so now I can just walk in and say, look, here's the book. Here's the information. This is what I'm going to tell you. And then you can read it on your own terms. You can read it whenever you want, or you can not read it. But this is exactly what I'm going to tell you. Here's the playbook. And the idea really stems from the fact that I saw a lot of people taking a very linear kind of procedural approach to things. And once they were done with research, they were like, okay, research is done. Now let's build it. And that's just not the reality. The reality is that you have to continuously go through all of these cycles to make sure that you're on track. And so that the name Loops comes from that. It comes from the fact that there is no step one complete, move to step two. Now that's complete, move to step three. Now that's complete. I mean, obviously there are different phases of development and design that you have to go through. But you can't completely ignore the research phase. You can't completely ignore the ideation phase. You can't completely ignore any of these things at any step, because if you do, that's when you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, you start to develop that tunnel vision and you get so focused on the solution that you start to forget about the problem.
Exactly.
Right? And I think that was a recurring theme here as well. As a matter of fact, you said something about that early on about falling in love with the right things.
We recently saw something in the startup world, which I think is a fantastic example with Quibi, where, these people had an enormous amount of money, they had an enormous amount of talent, and they just chased their idea instead of actually solving a validated problem that existed in the world. And it was a magnificent failure. And I think that's an easy thing to point to as an illustration of what can happen when you have all of the other tools in place, but you fail to follow a basic process that leads you towards helping people actually solve a problem that they have in their everyday lives.
Good. So So you mentioned that, that the fundamental concept of loops is that you don't want to take this linear process. Can you go a little bit more in depth as to how you apply and think of the concept of loops in the product development process as you see it?
Yeah, so when you start out, you have some form of hypothesis. So we think that these people have this problem, and we think we can solve this problem with this potential solution. And that's, an easy hypothesis to get started with. And first, you have to really understand if you really know the problem in the right way. So having this idea that people have a problem, or people need a way to accomplish X, that's fine, but you have to go and validate that first. That's that basic research. And people could call that market research. They could call it any kind of thing that you want, but it's basically going out and identifying the types of problem that exist and who has that problem. Then you have to make sure that there are enough people who have that problem in that same way, who are willing to pay for a solution before you go down this path of creating a product. So you might be, there's an example in the book about a bottle opener or a corkscrew. And we talked about how people who work in a very busy bar might want a bottle opener that works very quickly. And you might go and validate that with a handful of people who work in busy bars, and then go try to sell it at Bed Bath & Beyond to people who are at home, and it's just not the right tool, right? So you have to make sure that you're solving the right problem for the right people, and that you understand that those people have a particular way of thinking about that problem that might be different from a whole different target market or a different segment of the market. So really understanding the problem in excruciating detail is important before you begin building anything. Then as you begin to build, you have to loop back on that research, and you have to loop back to those people and validate what you're building at each step of the process. So taking an idea back to them on paper, it could be a paper prototype. It could be something if it's a physical product, it could be something you've built out of wood and clay. It could be, anything that's super early to validate that, yeah, this is going the right direction. Then as you continue that design and development process, you go through these loops of in the book, we talk about convergent thinking and divergent thinking. So divergent thinking is the how might we, that's the brainstorming, that's the coming up with all these ideas and getting them on the wall. And the convergent thinking is bringing those ideas back into one cohesive plan of something that you're going to build. And you have to continue those loops as you go. You have to continue asking the questions and then finding the answers, and asking the questions and finding the answers. And then that loop has to come back to the customer, come back to the people who are going to use the product and validate that you're on the right track. So there's this series of little tiny research loops and validation loops inside these larger kind of design process loops that are inside the overall product management process as a whole. And all of these things kind of fit together. And if you fail at any one of those loops, if you break that loop, if you break that cycle, then you're setting yourself up for risk. And the more risk you have, the greater chance you have of failure.
Very good. So yeah, a few of the terms that you used in there, the divergent thinking and convergent thinking, really harken back. And I know you're really passionate about the idea of human-centered design and design thinking type of practices. And a lot of the inputs that go into that kind of approach are very research dependent. And you touched a little bit on where research fits in the process. But one of the things that you pull out in your book is you actually walk through a research framework that you've developed over your career for how you actually think more specifically about going about the research. Could you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways to do research, and you can do hallway testing, you can do guerrilla testing, you can do moderated testing, unmoderated testing. There's all those types of things, and that's all great. And I think a lot of us get caught into the research methodology and potentially skip the idea of who we're doing the research with in the first place. Are we even talking to the right customers? And so how do you identify the right customers? How do you identify copycats of those people? If you've got a product that's, I'm just making something up here, if you've got a product that's for people who are VRBO and Airbnb hosts, there's a pretty broad spectrum of those types of people. Is it somebody who owns one property and they live there part-time? Is it somebody who is renting out a room in their house, or is it a property management company that has hundreds of properties? And those people are going to have different challenges. Those people are going to have different needs. And so really understanding the person first is really critical. The way that we think about it is you have, everyone here is probably very familiar with the idea of personas. And personas are fine, but personas can kind of limit you into thinking about this one kind of type of person. There's an archetype and it's got a name attached to it. And so you're thinking about this particular type of person, which is cool, but there's more to it.
Hey everybody, I hope you're enjoying the chat with Jay today. You should know I record a new episode every week, so make sure you hit the like button below and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single episode. And if you watch until the end of the video, I'll tell you how you can join me and about 100 other product managers as we record live each week.
What we think about is in terms of actors and roles, because each of us as an individual plays multiple roles throughout our day. We have a role as in our family, we have a role in our work, we have a role in our social life, and our core values exhibit themselves in each of those roles in maybe slightly different ways. So you might have a role as a father or a brother or a mother or a sister, and then at work you have a role as a manager, but then you also might have a role as a subservient to your boss. And so what we do is think about who is the actor in this particular situation? That's the person we're interviewing. And then how does this person's values and the way that this person approaches problem solving manifest itself in the role that they're playing when they have the problem we are trying to solve? So this particular person might be an early adopter. They might be not very risk averse. So they're going to try a new product. That's their core value. And in the role that they're playing as a decision maker in their company, they might be willing to try a piece of software or a product that somebody who is not very risk averse, or somebody who is risk averse, would not be willing to try that product. So we have to understand things on two levels. Who is the person making the decision? What are their values? And then what is the role that they're playing and the specific challenges that happen to them in that role?
That is a good set of distinctions to make, because in a different role, the same individual is going to have different motivations. So you have to understand where they are in their head at any given time. So
yeah, and a way to illustrate that is, we've all seen George Clooney in Ocean's 11, and we've probably all seen George Clooney in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Mm-hmm. The same actor, vastly different roles, but he brings some of the same characteristics to each of those roles. And so thinking about the person that you're talking to and abstracting that away from the role that they're in helps you get a better idea of what's similar about the challenges of everyone in that role, and separate that from the individual decision making of that person, of that actor.
How did you do you see a big distinction in how you approach that type of research and thought in a B2C type of a product environment versus a B2B type of a product environment?
There is a difference, but only really in execution. I kind of think of this as a B to H. You're selling to a human, and that human is either making a decision based on their own personal needs in a B2C situation, or on the larger needs of the organization they represent. And we have to remember that their personal needs will usually play a factor in how they represent the needs of the organization. So there might be some political motivation for buying a product, right? We have to think about is this not just about them being able to accomplish a task faster, but may it also be about them looking good for their boss so they can get that bonus or that promotion? So there's other motivators in a B2B environment. In the end, we're still selling to humans, and we need to understand the human motivations behind decision making and behind how they're going to choose whether to use our product versus a competitor, and remembering that our biggest competitor is nothing at all.
Thanks. So thanks for walking through the framework. And there's a lot of the frameworks that we look at kind of take an assumption of identifying a new problem and continuing to validate that new problem. The concept of loops that you talk about really addresses this fairly well, but I think it's really important. So let's come back and talk a little bit more specifically about how the process specifically evolves when you move from developing a new product and validating a new product to more of a life cycle management stage, as you're thinking about an existing product, a problem that you've already identified and that you have a solution in market to, does the system evolve? Do you approach things differently as you're deeper into the life cycle? What changes?
Well, so I think that maybe the main thing that changes is you don't have as many assumptions. So you don't have to validate quite as many things because you already have a body of work to reference that you can lean on to say, oh, well, we know that these things are true because we've seen customers use this in a certain way for some period of time. So we know these things are true, but then how might we improve upon that? That phrase, how might we, is really important. Some of you might already be using it in your daily work. The how might we is the thing that helps open up these ideas for how you can improve something. So rather than solving it for the first time or solving it in a better way than a product that maybe already exists, you're looking at incremental improvements. And that can be a lot harder to find because those pathways are already pretty clear, right? People have already paved the cow paths in that product. You've already got a very clear idea. You've got muscle memory. You've got a lot of habit and a lot of documentation about how this thing works. So changing it becomes difficult because you already have this kind of organizational and this product design inertia that's going in one direction. So the thing that you have to really be careful about is making changes that actually improve the product without knocking it off course. One of the things, there's an article up on our website right now that talks about looking at the features in a product, identifying the things that are the main drivers of use, identifying what we call fool's gold, which are features that exist that they seem sexy, but nobody's really using them and they might be problematic. Identifying the things that are kind of ripe for more development. What are the features that might be lurking kind of on the sidelines or in the shadows that some people are using, but with a little bit of polish could really add a lot of value to the product? And then, there's a lot of stuff that exists in products that people just don't use. So using some type of product analytics and seeing where people are actually using things, how they're using them, what they're using them for, can be a good way to help guide future direction on what you're going to do with future product development.
Very good. So let me shift gears here a little bit for just a minute. One of the things that we talked about when we were talking offline was how competitive research plays into this, so let's flip over to that concept for just a minute and talk about how you use and think of competitive research to help not only understand what's going on in the market in general and where your competition is, but how to help you further refine your understanding of a problem that you are identifying or have identified.
Yeah, so we see a lot of companies chasing their competition. We see, we're working with company X and their competitor, company Y, released this new feature. So now there's this giant push to release that same feature to remain competitive, right? It's always remaining competitive. And that's interesting. It's certainly worthy of discussion. But the danger there is we can see what they did, but we can't see why they did it. We don't know what the business reasons, we don't know if they even did any customer research. We don't know if this was just some high executive's pet feature that they wanted, and so they pushed it through. We don't know why that thing got released. And so merely copying somebody else's feature set because they did it first is never a good product management decision. It's never a good product strategy decision. You first have to go and validate, is that thing right for our customers and right for the direction we want to go with this product and for our organization? And so by people saying, well, we need feature A because our competitor has feature A, you're going down the wrong path. You might actually need feature A and the competitor has it because they beat you to doing the research or they were able to develop it faster or whatever reason. You might need it, but you need to validate it for yourself. And you can't see why they made those decisions, right? So you need to understand why that decision should be made for your organization. And just because a competitor has it is not enough.
With a slight twist on that, is there a criteria or a mental model that you use to evaluate what the competition is doing and use that further as validation for your own product direction, not necessarily the problem, but the product or the solution itself that you're designing. Do you use competitive research to help validate that?
Yeah, sure. And that's again going back and talking to customers, talking to your customers and figuring out if they have a need for that, if they're using that competitive product. We've got a number of clients who service businesses who have to use competition. So they're in, fintech, they're in travel. You can think about, any airline. If you have a customer, let's just use Delta, United, and American as an example. So if you're, let's say that you're UPS or you're Coca-Cola or you're somebody, Walmart or some organization like that, you're going to fly all three airlines. There's no getting around it, right? Because you have to go certain city to city, and one airline might service that route better than another one. So you're going to use all three airlines, period. So in that market, they have to figure out when another airline launches a feature or launches a service or whatever, like, is that the right thing for us in the way that we want to service our customers? We have seen examples of people launching things specifically because a competitor did it. And then we came in, here's a little anecdotal story. We came in and helped them understand that for them to launch that, there was going to be a certain amount of work. And we insisted that we do research first. So this particular product was targeted towards people who were corporate travel managers. And what we found was there's a certain subset of corporate travel managers. There's two roles to be played there, right? There's the administrator, and then there's like the day-to-day worker. And one of the major pushes was for this product to be mobile first. Everyone wanted it to work on a phone, right? Because you need to be able to work from anywhere. Well, we did some research and we found out that those people, the people who were using that application, did not want it to work on a phone at all, because that meant that they were going to have to do things outside of their desk, and they did not want to be asked to do things outside of their desk. So they actually preferred the old product because it did not work on mobile. And so taking that to the decision-making team at the airline, we said, listen, that's fine that you want to make it mobile first, but make it mobile first based on the role, based on the people who are asking for mobile, not just because you think it's a good idea. And when that product went out to market, it won some awards, it received resounding applause from the market, because those people who were actually using it day to day got what they wanted, not what the company thought that they wanted. So that's a good example of copying somebody else blindly without doing your own research could lead you down a path where your customers are going to end up being upset because they got something that they didn't want.
That's a really good example. And it resonates with some experiences that I've had as well. I remember a very precise parallel around a mobile first initiative that we were going through. And there was kind of that blind executive view of, well, everything needs to be available on mobile. But the reality is the customers that even wanted mobile, the users that wanted a mobile solution, didn't want it for everything. They wanted it for specific tasks. I want to check status on mobile. I don't want to go, I was in email marketing software. I don't want to go build a new marketing email on my iPad, but I do want to check the status of the last campaign I sent.
Exactly. Another example. So I don't know if we talked about this early enough or not, but Nine Labs focuses on the travel and fintech industries. That's it. Those are the two industries that we work with. And so we've got a couple of fintech clients, and one of them makes software for bank tellers. And so we were doing some research around improving one of those products. And they had this big initiative that they were going to revamp this whole workflow and do all of these things because that's what they thought was best from their competitive research. And that's what the research that they had done internally with developers, not customers, with their internal developers, said that they needed to redo this product in a certain way. So we went out and we talked to a handful of bank tellers, and we did some kind of just observational analysis and just watching the way that they work. And what we found out is there was only one problem in the entire process, and it was because one thing was in a modal dialogue instead of being in line with the rest of the form. And that one modal dialogue The reason it was a problem is because on their screens, because this bank branch or this bank company had some older monitors. So on their screens, the resolution wasn't large enough for the bank teller to see the information they needed to put into the modal dialogue, because the modal dialogue covered that piece of information on the screen. So watching the actual person use the product and going and doing that, ground level research saved that company $600,000 in development, because all they had to do is change it from a modal dialogue to putting that form input on the same page. So the user just now had to scroll instead of writing. They had to write something down on a piece of paper, launch the modal dialogue, type it in from the piece of paper, and then close the modal dialogue. Now they can just scroll down and type it in.
That's a great example.
Jason, I got a quick question to follow up on that, if I can.
Sure, you bet.
I'm a big fan of watching customers use products, if it's competition, if it's us, and riding along with nurses or sitting in the dental office, and naturally in COVID, that's not allowed. So I'm struggling a little bit as we're designing new features and workflows with a MVP product. How can I get to some of those intricacies that if you ask the customer, they're not going to tell you, but if you watch them, you can see it? And I've played with, can we set up a camera in your office and things like that? And, people don't like being watched. And so what have you had any suggestions, or is it kind of just this is what we live in right now? You work with the data you have, or how have you been able to get some of that?
So depending on the InfoSec requirements and the politics in the organization, I would highly recommend getting some form of product telemetry installed. So you could use something like FullStory or Pindo. There's a number of tools out there that can record the session VCR style, and you can go back and see what people do. In the absence of sitting in the room with somebody, and I would say in many cases, it's even better than sitting in the room with somebody, because then they don't have someone looking over their shoulder influencing their behavior. So that's a great way to get telemetry back almost in real time from any product. It will require a little bit of development lift, and obviously there's some political stuff that has to happen, approvals and budgetary stuff. But if you can get telemetry in the application, that's going to be one of the most reliable ways to get good feedback on what people are doing.
Another concept that came up on a previous call when we had Eric Holtzclaw in a few weeks back, and this one's out on the YouTube channel as well, if anybody wants to go back and take a look at it. We didn't go deep on it, though. He did touch on leveraging journaling, and there's an art and a skill to getting your customers to journal and do it effectively. But there are some resources out there, and maybe I'll look at a session for that in the future as well. That in the absence of an actual ride along, getting some logging, some manual logging from a customer is a potentially useful tool that might help there as well. Once again, that's a heavy lift for them, so there's got to be a value in it for that customer.
Right. And one thing it doesn't mean you should not ask the customer to journal, or you should not do observational research or anything. You obviously should do a lot of those things. Any documentation is better than no documentation. Just understand that anytime you're asking a customer to change their behavior in any way, even if it's after the fact, that they know they're going to have to write it down, or they're having to think about taking notes or anything like that. Anytime you ask someone to change their behavior in any way, they're going to change their behavior, and that's not the true real behavior they would use on the normal happy path of using that product. So just know that you're always going to introduce some form of bias. And that's one of the great things about product telemetry, is it helps remove some of that bias, because it's just recording what's happening in normal ambient life. And you're not having somebody sit in the room, and everyone here, and I know I suffer from this every single time someone is in the room with me and I'm typing, my words per minute drops. I make more errors. I hit the semicolon instead of the L, and I forget to use the shift key. My typing just goes out the window whenever someone's even in the room. They don't even have to be like watching what I'm doing. So anytime you're exerting any type of influence or asking a customer to change their behavior in any way, you will get skewed results. So just be aware of that.
That's a great question. Jonathan, thank you very much for jumping in. And I'd like to, we're at 8:38 right now. We've got a few minutes, which isn't really enough to break off into small groups. but I would like to open the floor. And research has been a pretty hot topic here at Product Coffee. So I'd like, does anyone else have either a personal observation or a question that they'd like to open up for discussion as well?
Well, sorry, I got one more thing then. Just on the competitive research, one of the things I found kind of really good about what you said is I'm working on a product that is a supplementary software to the core product of what we build. And so pretty much all of our customers use competition from me. And, I'm starting from ground zero, and they've been building these products for 3 or 4 years, and they've got, 20, 30, 40 features and checkboxes. And one of the things we did that I found pretty successful is I surveyed about 100 of our customers and that are using competition. I say, click the features you're actually using. And that kind of dwindled me down to a subset. And then I was able to dive in from there, saying, of these features you're using, what works well, what doesn't. And I've certainly found that useful, where there are features that our competition has built that no one's using.
Yep, exactly. Jason, do you mind if I post a link to that blog post I referenced?
Absolutely, please do. I was going to go ahead and add it to the resources after the fact, but that'll make it easier.
So, hey, Jay, right. You mentioned not just following the competition with certain features, but how do you kind of sell that to sales, who kind of comes back and throws up their arms that they can't sell it without it? So what are some of the techniques to bring them along?
Well, if somebody tells me that they can't do something without a certain feature, I ask them to show me the data. And if they say, well, people are buying product X, and it's like, show me why that feature is the reason that those customers bought that product or renewed that product. Show me the data. And then let's talk about what's in the best interest of our customers. Because sometimes someone might add a feature to a product and it might be the exact opposite of what our customers want. Our customers are using our product because it doesn't have that, or because it does it in a different way. So let's talk about show me definitive, hard, quantitative information that proves that that feature is going to help us. They can't do it. They never can. They don't know what they're talking about. Right? Now let's talk about the research that we've done. Now I'm going to show you my data. Here's the research that we've done. Here's the research where we can see that people have this problem, and that solving it in this way we think will work because we've solved other problems in similar ways using the same methodologies, and it's gotten us this far.
Kind of a related question. What's your view on things like Gartner reports? Because I think a lot of enterprises use that as a checklist type of
sure.
Way to evaluate products, right? So
yeah. And those things are fine. In my experience, so first, as a backdrop to this, is anyone here familiar with motivated reasoning? Motivated reasoning is a trap that that everyone falls into, and intelligent people can detect, but we still fall into it. It's basically, it's very similar to this kind of bias where we find information that supports our argument. And motivated reasoning is essentially a way for us to rationalize things based on our own motivations. And Gartner reports are fine, but how and why are they being used? When I see someone quoting a Gartner report, it's usually because it supports their point of view and doesn't necessarily support the best interest of the entire organization. So it's fine. It's good data. I mean, any data that you have that can support getting to a decision is good. It doesn't mean that you have to follow it just because Gartner printed it or because McKinsey issued a report or whatever. Like, those organizations are fine, but always make sure that it makes sense in the context of the problem you're trying to solve for those people in the role that you're trying to solve for.
Some great questions. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I want to follow up on something John said a second ago about how you do the, about when you research with competitors. There's an article, I'll drop it in the chat as well. That was it was talking to the CEO of Superhuman about the questions they ask about their own product market fit. And one of the key ones is like, would you be disappointed if you couldn't use this product anymore? And if the ratio is not higher than 40%, he says like, okay, we have not found, the right product market fit here. And I think there's an opportunity here when you're looking at, doing competitive research as well, to say like, hey, is there something about a competitive product that either the audience of it like really, really loves, and I have to find a way to take that aspect and do it even better, or perhaps the more powerful opportunity is there's a piece of this that's like, well, this is the software we have and we're using it, and you can see where those opportunities are to really improve a piece of that workflow and find an opportunity to exceed that competitor and motivate a consumer to switch. So it's not that emotional connection of it is a pretty important piece of it.
Yeah, people are emotional animals, and we make a lot of decisions based on, or at least influenced by, emotion. One of the questions that we like to ask is, how would and this is where you could insert life or work or workflow or process, how would your thing change if this didn't exist? And the this in that context could be the thing that they're currently using, the software that they're currently using. So how would your life change if Salesforce didn't exist, right? Oh God, this is a panic mode for me, right? Or for some people, they'd be like, oh my God, can you delete Salesforce? That would make things so much easier. Really? Tell me more about that, right? Because then they're going to get into the why. In our research, we really discourage asking why questions, because why questions put people in judgment. Because if you ask somebody why they did something, then they're going to answer you trying to validate their own decisions. They're not going to answer you for the rationale that led to that decision. So we always try to rephrase those questions as what question. So what led you to do it that way? Or what are the reasons that you do things that way? Or what stops you from doing it this way? Or what causes you to do it that way? Because then the judgment isn't on them. The judgment is on the criteria, the things that surround that decision. So in the case of excuse me, in the case of trying to figure out, like with Superhuman, like, do we have an app people love? What would change if you had to go back to using Gmail? Right? Oh, well, then I couldn't do this or I couldn't do that. And those are going to be the hot button features for them, right? Because those are the things that are front of mind. If you go to, and Jason, we can send the link out later. If you go to loopsbook.com/resources, that's a cheat to get all the stuff that I mentioned in the book. And in there is a kind of a swipe file of interview questions that we use. There's some other good stuff in there about how to ask. We separate these questions into a couple of buckets, right? There's kind of introductions, which is, hey, nice to see you, oh, I like your shoes, or something like that. And then there's refiners and explorers. And so what we recommend people do is use a couple of key phrases. One of those key phrases is, tell me more about that. When you hear something that's interesting, tell me more about that, explain that. And then another great one is, here's what I heard you say. This is something that comes out of cognitive therapy. Here's what I heard you say. Tell me where I'm wrong. And then one of the best ones in all research, what am I missing? What am I missing here? Here's what I see. Here's what I've heard you say. What am I missing? And what those things do is they enable whoever you're interviewing, whoever you're talking to kind of repeat things back to you using different words, which helps you really get to the core of what they mean. One of the fundamental challenges in all research and all human communication is that we think that our high functioning brain communicates directly with the high functioning brain of the other person. And that's just not true. All of that has to go through something called the lizard brain. We talk about this in the book too. And the way people word things is different based on all types of factors. It's based on their psychological profile, their upbringing, their language skills. There's all types of things that can influence how people communicate. And if I say something with my high functioning brain, just like I'm doing right now, it's not going directly to your high functioning brain and being translated into directly the thought that I had that generated that language. It just never works that way. So there's always a kind of an interpretation, if you will, of what people truly mean. And the more different ways you can get them to say the same thing, the better you can triangulate to get that true meaning of what they're trying to say. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah, totally.
Jay, I want to thank you. This has been a fantastic session. It's been a great session. We've gotten to go really deep on some concepts and topics that are really top of mind for a lot of the folks that attend this. Any parting shots? Anything you want to part with as we're kind of wrapping things up for the day?
I would just say that bias is present everywhere, even in ourselves. Like, we bring our own bias to things, and the more we can do to recognize that bias and try to mitigate that bias, the better decisions we're going to make. There's another book which I highly recommend, called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. She talks about a lot of the psychology of decision making and how making decisions when you don't have all the information is very difficult. And in a lot of what we do, we think we've got all the information because we've gone and we've talked to the 5 customers that people say that we need to talk to. And that's not all the information. Let's be honest. There's so much more information out there, and more information being generated every day. So being able to make good decisions with a group of people who are seeking the truth, and making those decisions in the absence of a lot of information that could influence the outcome, is a skill that needs to be developed. And I think all of us could be better at what we do by understanding that there's a lot of things out there that can influence those decisions, and being able to recognize them either as individuals or as a group and act accordingly.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us, folks. We've got a link over to a lot of the resources that Jay mentioned today on the resources page, and I'll add the ones that we've kind of grabbed, including the articles that Jerry and I think somebody else was going to put in Brian, you put in another link here. I'll drop those over on the resources page as well, and I'll send them and they'll be in the archive notes as well when we get that up in the next few days. Thanks everyone for coming. It's been a great day. I'm going to keep the call open for a little while, but I know some of you have to get to 9 o'clock meetings, so I want to make sure that we've got plenty of time to transition out, but we'll keep the Zoom call open until 9:15 for anybody who wants to stay around and get to know each other a little bit better, or ask a few final questions and kind of take the discussion deeper. Thanks for coming today, though.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today. Thank you for staying around. We record these sessions at our weekly Product Coffee virtual meetup events. And if you'd like to join me and about 100 other product professionals from around the world, you can sign up for our newsletter using the link in the description below. We'll send you out an invitation every week as soon as registration goes live.